Thank you very much, Catherine. Good morning, everybody. I'm really delighted to be here and honoured to have been invited to join you here this morning to launch this very important document. I suppose I'm from Offaly, even though I represent Laois Offaly, so to clarify that, it's very important for Offaly people to be recognised as Offaly people. This is a very serious topic. It's something that I was aware of, I suppose, as a young woman living in Dublin in the 80s. I lived in Pembroke Street and didn't realise, of course, as a young woman moving up to Dublin, anything much about trafficking, because I'm from a small town in West Offaly or prostitution, and I wouldn't have really had any great insight into it. However, when I moved to Dublin and lived in the city, it was very clear to me from a very early stage that there was a lot of on-street prostitution happening right outside the building that I lived in. And I suppose from that began to question, what is this all about? Who are these women? Even on the bus sometimes I would see them coming to Leeson Street to get off the bus, and it became familiar with even some of the faces, because it was a time in Ireland in the 80s where we had loose sniffing, we had children homeless in the basements of houses that are now beautifully restored and all the rest of it. And we did have a lot of on-street prostitution, and in fact myself and my friends were always very careful at that time to travel together, because there were occasions when we ourselves were approached simply because we were walking along Fitzwilliam Square. And as a politician, one of the most challenging roles, I suppose, that we've had in the last year and a half is to be asked by the Minister for Justice to look at our prostitution laws with a view to making proposals as to what types of reforms that we would propose. Now, our Joint Oireachtas Committee is made up of politicians from all political parties and independents. And I have to say that all of us have worked together on this. We have listened to some tremendous presentations from people, some surprising presentations from people, conflicting ideas about it, and we did finally produce our report and presented it to the Minister before the summer. Now, he undertook that he would read it over the summer and come back to us if he had any queries, and he has done that. And only yesterday we finally put together our thoughts in response to the queries that he had, and they will now be submitted back to him, and we would hope that he will engage with us further on this. I firmly support Ruhama's position and the role in Turn Off the Red Light campaign in terms of criminalising the purchasers of sex. I think, and I'm worried about our society, I'm concerned about how pornography, about how the sexualisation of our young people is becoming almost the norm. I mean, I'm worried about looking at television programmes like Friends, where they're so blasé about watching porn together and all this kind of stuff. And, you know, that's really insidious kind of a way of normalising something that is not normal. The exploitation of human beings is not normal. And, of course, it is primarily women who are exploited. And, sadly, that is normal. A normal behaviour. It's not normally acceptable by the rest of us, but it's becoming that way, and I'm worried about that. And I think that this is an opportunity for us, in terms of reforming the prostitution laws, to send out a very strong message. And you know, it's not, a lot of men don't use prostitutes. It is a small number, but we want to send out a very strong message that it is not good behaviour. It's not good for our young men to look at women as objects that you can actually purchase the use of. It is very, very wrong in my view, and I totally disagree with it. It has been a challenge, I feel, as a public representative when I raise it, and of course there are opportunities for us informally to talk about all of the work that we're doing on committees. And you know, it's almost like there's I'm trying to think of the right word now, there's, I suppose, an impression in the minds of a lot of our men at different levels that, you know, well, you know, they're all independent people. They're making these choices, and sure, aren't they grand if they're making, if you bob out of it and they're all happy. And this pretty woman impression that was created with Julia Roberts and Richard Gere, you know, even on Midlands 103, where I did an interview quite early on in this, that was tossed out as an argument. But sure, look, isn't it? Oh, what's wrong with this? And, you know, that's something that we really have to stand up and not be afraid to challenge that and say, well, actually, there's a lot wrong with this. And, you know, there's a great deal of discomfort when you start outlining the reality that Ruhama, no, I was speaking to the caseworker out there earlier on, and the type of work that Ruhama are doing on the ground. You know, Ruhama are here 24 years, I think, in operation. And, you know, you are the experts, in my view, on this. You are the ones who know what's happening. Every year you're producing your report, and every year you're coming up with the facts. You know, we're all talking about evidence-based policy making. Well, here is the evidence. And a lot more people need to read and understand about this evidence. And sometimes when you're in a society where the economy is the primary focus, it has to be, because we have to function as a society and we need money, unfortunately. It would be great if we didn't. I mean, the way some people are talking, you'd think there was a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. But I'm concerned that these kind of really important social issues would be left and ignored. But that is not luckily the case in terms of the work that we've done on our Joint Oireachtas Committee. I'm really, really impressed with the work that Ruhama do, and I know that you've been very challenged. Everybody has experienced cuts and nobody's happy about that. But I was just looking at your leaflet here, and I really admire the way that you're thinking in terms of getting some private fundraising. Unfortunately, it has to be done, but I think it's work well spent, because if you can, in terms of fundraising, you're doing more than just getting money. You're actually raising the profile of the organisation. So that's really, really important, because if you're getting your message out there, it means that more and more people will hear the message and hear the facts of the situation in relation to prostitution in this country at the moment. I note that in the report that there were 258 people accessed the service this year. That's an awful lot of people that came through Ruhama, and it probably is only the tip of the iceberg of people who actually need our support. Back when I was living in Dublin in the 80s, as I say, on-street prostitution was, as far as I could see as a young person, the norm. Whereas now, so much of it has moved indoors that it is very, very hard to reach people, very, very hard. And the attempts by some people to try to separate trafficking from prostitution is also something of great concern. If anybody wants proof of it, and I mean, again, we're all looking at evidence. It's all about the evidence at the moment. Look at the Blue Blindfold, the Garda Síochána Blue Blindfold website, and you will read some cases in there that will really confirm to you that there is trafficking of children brought into this country for the purposes of pornography and sexual exploitation. Children. I mean, it is just appalling. And it is not acceptable to me, and it is not acceptable, I know, to Ruhama and to all of the other people involved in this field, and particularly the people involved with the Turn Off the Red Light campaign. It is not acceptable, not in our country. And I firmly believe, and I know that all of you here, you have shown your interest in this, are saying it is not acceptable. Absolutely not. And to think that there are migrant people being brought into our country, children who are being used for these purposes. It is just, you know, it is not acceptable. I just have to say this time and time again, because it just is not. In terms of the trafficking and prostitution being a global problem, I had the pleasure of meeting with the global anti-trafficking coordinator earlier on in the year, and it is definitely something that we should all as human beings be concerned about. Human trafficking is happening all over the world, and it will always happen, and prostitution will always happen, where you have people who are marginalised, who are impoverished, who have very few choices. So it is a question of us to say, is it acceptable for us to allow this type of exploitation to happen? I was interested in a story that you told me about a young person who was found here in Dublin, and she was 15 when she was found here, but she had been bought for €10,000 by a family, and she was living, she had no papers, she was living with the family here in Dublin, and this is recent now. This young girl is still in the school system now, but she was bought and paid for. And when they tracked back through Interpol and through all of the international connections, they found that a number of young girls were being taken from a particular village in Nigeria, by a particular individual. And he was promising the parents that there would be a better life. We will educate this child. She can do a bit of housework. There's a family in Ireland that would love to have her. Now, when you are in a very vulnerable position, you are naturally enough going to think, well, you know what, maybe they will have a better life. But they are being duped. They are being duped, and it's happening the world over. And now, luckily, this young woman had a good outcome in that she managed to make her escape, and somebody brought her to the Garda Síochána, and she is now in the health service with a foster family, and she is being cared for. But that is one thing. I mean, I could not believe when I read this that somebody was bought and paid for in Ireland today. I mean, this is modern-day slavery, whether we like it or not. Now, to come back to the work that Ruhama are doing, fantastic and excellent work, and I'm really delighted to be in the company of such eminent people here who are going to talk to you all as the morning goes on, and of all of whom have contributed to our work on the Joint Oireachtas Committee. I think that the day that Ruhama says we're not needed anymore will be a fabulous day. But judging by the research that they're conducting and the research that is coming in, that day is not going to happen anytime soon. There will always be work for Ruhama, always, unless we can address this and unless we can make it easier for women who are in prostitution to exit it safely. That is one of the very strong messages that came across to us in the Joint Oireachtas Committee. There is no point in criminalising the purchaser unless you're going to make it easy for women to exit prostitution and put support services in place for them. And that is going to be the challenge, but it's doable in my view. It is doable. If there is a will there to do it, we can do it. And give people opportunities for education, housing, training, supports, to realise that you're not on your own and that there's somebody there to support you. And I think that is where Ruhama has been so successful, is in giving people an open door to say, come in, we won't judge you. Come in, you're welcome, we will help you. And that is what I think is going to be needed. And I think for all of us as a society, the challenge is there, not to view people with blinkered eyes, but to see who they are and why they're there, and not to judge them, but to help them. And I think that is the key. So I don't think I'll go on any further. There are far more interesting speakers than me. But I just want to say I am deeply honoured and delighted to have been asked to launch Ruhama's Annual Report 2012. If you read this report, that's fantastic. If you share this report, it'll be better. And make sure, whatever you do, because remember, you're all voters. I always say that to people, don't forget, you're voters. You have a good say. Contact all of your local public representatives and national public representatives and make your voices heard. It is not acceptable for human beings to treat other human beings the way they're being treated at the moment. It is not acceptable anywhere. And that we want to ensure that the prostitution laws are reformed to ensure that women, and if there are some men there too, want to exit prostitution, that they can. The way to do this is to criminalise the user of prostitution, to send out a strong message to our young men that it is not acceptable. And I think we will have a far healthier and inclusive society if we do that. So it gives me great pleasure to formally launch the Ruhama Annual Report 2012.